Another week, another episode, The Stroke of Midnight. We are in the midst of chaos, as I am never prepared for anything that I'm supposed to do. And so, with that being said, Dorian, hit me with this week's topic.
All right. This week's topic, decisively, is going to be how the 80s destroyed youthful innocence.
All right.
A nice light topic for a morning conversation. This one's a surprise to both of us. I've got a list here, and I just kind of,
he's just picking
ran my finger down it and said, let's do this one today.
So
it's a great list, by the way.
Let me begin by saying that the 80s did, in fact, destroy youthful innocence, but it also made for people that can handle some shit. And I think that there are pros and cons to maybe growing up a little too fast, maybe experiencing certain things that you shouldn't experience at such a young age. I am staring at my wall right now, and there is this glorious Falcor that looks over all of my stuff. For those of you who ever got to meet or hear about my dog Silas, he was basically Falcor in the flesh. But that leads to probably the most iconic example of how the 80s destroyed youthful innocence. And that is The Never-Ending Story. A classic tale of a world about to end, made for children.
Yep. That's
Dorian.
the kind of stuff we had. That's the kind of stuff we dealt with.
Dorian, as our resident film buff, can you please, in a coherent manner, describe to the audience the glory that is The Never-Ending Story?
Probably not in a coherent manner. I would imagine actually you would probably be better suited to this task, because
I would be, but not in an even less coherent manner than you. So
it has been a lamentably long time since I have actually watched The Never-Ending Story. This was definitely a staple of my youth, but it's probably been well over a decade since I've actually seen the film.
That's a problem.
I know. One that should be remedied as quickly as possible, and maybe even tonight. Who knows? Now that we're talking about it, I'm kind of getting the bug, because like for me, I more so, again, because I haven't really seen it since my youth, when it was like just digested and consumed constantly. I more so just have like really vivid impressions of the movie, particularly Falcor, because I always wanted a dog when I was a kid, and I wanted a dachshund. And him being like very long, and dog-like, it was it was a fantasy that I could really inject myself into
very quickly.
Yeah.
Just to clarify this for anyone who may be confused, Falcor was not a dog. He was a luck dragon.
Luck dragon. Yep.
All right. So he did have scales. They were odd. He did have fur as well, but dragon, not dog.
Yes. Dog-like qualities.
Dog-like qualities. Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, so as a child, I was able to like fully buy into that entire fantasy, because I was like, fuck yeah, I want Falcor around.
Yeah.
And then of course the movie proceeds to just like tear your heart and your soul to shreds.
Well, that's the thing, right? Yeah. So a movie in theory made for 8-year-olds dives very deeply into death and apathy and the apocalypse, essentially. So there is the classic scene of Artax, I believe is the horse's name.
The horse, yeah.
And Atreyu. And the horse drowns in the sea of sadness, I think, or the swamps of sadness. Man, I'm going to be so embarrassed because like I watch this movie at least once a year, but some of these things escape me.
Yeah.
So, like to have a movie that very, very bluntly confronts death is not something that's done anymore. It just isn't.
For the 8 to 10-year-old demographic.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to. Now, okay. This time I do believe that I have access to my props, so to speak.
Oh, okay.
So very quickly, I'm going to go grab a couple of movies because I want to see what the ratings are for these movies, because I think this will be very interesting to see what context, it can add a little context. So, Dorian, continue to tell the audience about the Neverending Story while I go seek out my VHS copy of that and maybe a couple other movies.
Cool. We can do that. So in addition to dealing with the weighty themes that Greg has already pointed out that the film deals with, if memory serves me correct, so the film, for anybody who hasn't seen it, is it has like a framework, sort of like Princess Bride, where this kid is like reading this book up in his attic, and as he's reading the book, we see, the adventure that's unfolding in the story play out on the screen. And then the movie jumps back and forth between that fantasy world and this kid reading the book about this fantasy world. If memory serves me correctly, the kid reading the book in the attic, it's this like horribly rainy night. And I believe his parents are going through some sort of relationship conflict, potential divorce staring down that barrel. So on top of everything that the film deals with, from the apocalyptic and, death sense of things, it's also kind of dealing with the young person, preteen, adolescent, dealing with, their parents' relationship dissolving as well. So, in addition to everything else, we lump that on top of it. So, yeah, again, doesn't seem like it would be the obvious choice for a children's story, but in the 80s, this was kind of the mindset we were dealing with. Many movies of this era, which I'm sure we'll get into, dealt with topics like this. And growing up in the time, it's like, now looking back at it, it seems weird, when I rewatch some of these films, like, God, this is what they showed us as kids. But at the time, in all honesty, it seemed completely normal. This just seemed like what movies were, because it was so ubiquitous that a children's movie would deal with these kinds of topics. Nowadays, I know studios like Pixar are a bit more elegant in the way that they appeal to both a younger audience and the adults that have to sit in the theater with them. But kind of back in the 80s, it was a little more clunky and ham-fisted, and they would basically just sort of shove adult themes into what they thought were like child trappings, like fantasy. Oh yeah,
I'm back.
That's a stack
with some fun. So,
dude, those are awesome.
All right, I have no idea what Dorian just said, but I'm going to agree with everything he just said.
One point I want you to clarify for me. So in the framework story for Neverending Story, where the kid reading the book in the attic, his like parents are like fighting or getting divorced or something. Like there's some sort of like domestic trouble.
Yeah,
sort of sends him for this escapism up in the attic. And I know it's like raining outside. It's just really pile it on,
Yeah. So there's a part of me that wants to say his mom dies or is sick.
Right. That sounds more correct.
Yeah. So you have a movie that begins with a child who's losing his mother or has lost his mother, and then proceeds to lock himself in the attic, so to speak, of his school during a thunderstorm and begins reading the Neverending Story. And this is after stealing the book from a bookstore that he hides in to escape bullies. So, it's just all of the bad things that you could possibly imagine happening to a child all happen in the first 5 minutes of the movie.
Yep.
I mean... but man, there's confronting these situations and acknowledging them, I think, is something that is it's a good thing as long as it's done properly.
Mm-hmm.
But it's definitely something that's not done so much anymore, and it's probably has a little bit to do with why things are the way they are these days. I don't know. I probably sound like a silly old man saying shit like this, but I do I do think that people are a little too coddled these days, and they have a hard time accepting things that are, put in front of them. And maybe, supposedly the Never Ending Story has just been greenlit for a reboot, which is terrifying.
Of course it has.
Terrifying. But, if we can maybe take some of the lessons that we learned from the original and maybe apply them to modern day, that wouldn't be such a bad thing. So,
right.
All right.
My guess is we're going to get more like a, 5-episode, the origin of the Luck Dragons, spin-off. And they're just going to they're going to miss the point.
Well, I do know, the one thing that I do know is that apparently the studio that got it because they have the right intentions. That's what I've read. So it's not it's not a major studio production. I believe it's going to be a little bit more, not independent, but more along those lines.
Sure. Not like Netflix or Amazon.
No.
Which also I just need to briefly be despondent over the fact that when you say major studios, those are the names that come out now.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you still got your Warner Brothers and your Universal, and
they're all falling apart.
Is it called the Fox now? Is it not called 20th Century Fox anymore? I thought I saw something the other day.
I think they might, because they've increasingly trying to create a division between Fox News and the rest of Fox.
Oh,
which apparently internally they are completely separate. They have no crossover whatsoever. So I think they've been trying more and more so to kind of distance the two things, because obviously, they don't want political opinions affecting opinions about where people find their entertainment.
Yeah. Well, that makes, again, the dilution of entertainment to boil down, bare necessities of plot and opinion and such. When you make something for everyone, you really don't make it for you make it for no one. I think, that's probably a major problem that major studios have right now, is that they try to make everyone happy, and in turn you make nobody happy.
Yeah.
Netflix and like Amazon and HBO, they still have a little bit of, all right, this is for these people, this is for these people, fuck everyone else, I will say this, just to go off topic a little bit. I just watched, so do you remember Tom Green?
Oh yeah. I saw a 35 millimeter print of Freddie Got Fingered last year.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So did you know that Tom Green signed a major deal with Amazon? And so they put out his new comedy special. He has a reality show about how he left Hollywood and moved back to Canada and bought a farm. And so the reality show follows him in his journey of buying the farm, renovating the farm, buying a mule and a donkey, and how his old friends and his parents and everyone, they all kind of come together, and he's like starting life over again, essentially, in his 50s after, just decades of craziness. But then the third part of the deal was they actually did a documentary on his life. And I found that incredibly interesting and inspiring, because he starts the documentary off with talking to his mom, and his mom asks him, has anyone ever directed their own documentary? Is it at that point a documentary? And he goes, probably not, but we're going to do it anyway. And his whole, he was a extreme person in his youth, and watching the progression of his career and how he managed things, and then the hindsight that he has and the perspective that he has now versus when he was in the middle of it all was it was really incredibly done. It was really insightful. He did not avoid difficult topics, as he didn't when he was at the peak of his career either. I mean, he did it. His last special on MTV was him getting surgery for testicular cancer.
That's right.
So he was never one to shy away from the difficult stuff. But point being is, I think that the streamers, the major streamers, have an understanding that and maybe this is just because of mass consumption or whatever the case may be, but they're not interested necessarily in the path of least resistance when it comes to putting things out. Comedy's been a big thing in the streaming platforms, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, and they've come to this conclusion that it's okay if we only serve 20% of our audience with this stuff, because we'll find something else to serve the other 80%, we'll do it in increments, right? So, all right, this 20%, this shit's for you. This 20%, that's for you, so on and so forth. And I think I guess the consumer aspect of major cinema can't take those chances anymore. Just, it's too expensive to make movies. The reliance on theater sales isn't as fruitful as it once was. Whatever the case may be, I have no idea. But there is still this dagger to the things that are being put out there. You don't find them in the movie theater anymore.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's you have to be able to absorb those kinds of risks. You have to be a vertically integrated, corporation that's okay, making movies isn't the only thing we live or die on, Yeah. That's all underwritten by our, in the case of Apple or Amazon, or, obviously giant, megacorp, that if we spend 200 million on a movie and it doesn't do well, it's probably just a tax write-off for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's changed the whole business story. We don't need to get into that, of course, but the Tom Green stuff is really cool. I didn't know he had done that. I'll have to check those out.
It's really good.
It's one of those I remember watching his show on MTV when it was on and stuff. And of course it was just who's this crazy guy?
Yeah.
And it was really fun, but I've come to especially where comedy has gone since him. It's been interesting, seeing Freddie Got Fingered again last year. I was holy shit, he was really ahead of his time.
Well, that was a big talking point throughout the entire thing, was he was the first to do a lot of things, and he never really got the credit that he deserves, because he was here's the thing, right? For me, I grew up in a small town in the middle of nowhere. So when I'm 16 years old or 15 years old watching the Tom Green show, you have in the 90s, you have no frame of reference for who else is actually watching this show. You don't realize how big it actually was and how big he actually was at the time, because you didn't have Facebook and Instagram and all this shit and thousands of people resharing some viral moment that he made or using him as a meme. And you have these ways of like kind of like verifying how popular or how known somebody is now, and that didn't exist in the 90s. And so that was one of the big like kind of discoveries for me watching the documentary, was like, this dude was fucking huge for the time, and he was unbelievably popular amongst people our age, that 15 to 25 or whatever the demos you want to use, but
no, he was all over. When I was at UW-Madison, that was kind of my indication. It was like everywhere.
Yeah.
You'd hear when it came on, it was like you could hear it down the hall of the dorm, like all these TVs playing the same thing.
Yeah.
It was pretty wild, but that's cool. He's having like a Jim Carrey moment. Goes from this like eccentric comedian to like this sagacious hermit kind of character.
Well, he's still out there. That's the thing. He flew under the radar for a long time, but I think he's experiencing a bit of a resurgence, and a lot of it has to. So he is actually credited for basically inventing the podcast as well. Like, we would not be doing this right now, probably. He called it. What did he call it? Webo.
So was it Howard Stern or was it Tom Green?
Well, see, here's the thing, right? Howard Stern transformed radio. Tom Green discovered the untapped potential of what the internet could provide. So after he left MTV and he like had a couple other little projects, and after he kind of like got banished from Hollywood after Freddie got fingered, he came up with the idea to do a talk show in his house, and he called it Webovision. And at the time, that was unheard of.
Yeah.
And there's actually this really cool scene in the documentary where because he had Joe Rogan on, and in the episode, Joe was like, dude, you just discovered this is it. Like, this is the greatest thing ever. He's like, we just have to figure out how to monetize it. Like, they're literally having this conversation in real time. And then like 6 months later, Joe started his podcast.
Oh, wow.
The rest is history.
Yeah.
So like, true pioneer.
Wow, that's crazy. I feel like I remember this too, that it was one of those, because he had a meteoric rise and a just incredible downfall.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like overnight. Like, Freddie Got Fingered came out, and then it was like Tom Green is over.
Yeah. He got divorced from Drew Barrymore.
That's right. Yeah.
He had the cancer, he had the movie, and then he got divorced, and it was like he just disappeared.
Yeah.
But he didn't disappear. He just left the machine, essentially.
And I remember at the time, the general sentiment was kind of that, like, this was an act of desperation, to do this Webovision show. I remember even kind of hearing about it, like, oh, he's doing something for free on the internet or whatever. Like, that's a bummer.
He just said, fuck all of this.
Yeah.
I want to do what I want to do. And so, so the point being, he has made some appearances recently on the JRE, on like Tom Segura's podcast. So like the comedians who kind of came up underneath him, who he kind of helped show the way, they're in turn responsible for this sort of resurgence, because they've brought him back into the forefront, via their podcast. And so I think because he kept doing comedy the entire time, he was just on the road. He just wasn't like, he wouldn't put out specials. He wouldn't like do TV unless it was under his own terms or whatever. But I think, in the last like since the pandemic, basically, because he went and like bought a van and like would just like, he did like the van life thing, like out of the pandemic, and then was like doing comedy shows and like started getting like the grassroots thing going. And then like he started doing podcasts again. And that's when everyone was like, holy shit, like Tom Green, we remember him. Like he was amazing. But people don't realize that like he's been around. He just hasn't been like public facing so much.
Well, and to bring it back around, I guess you could say that the demographic that he was so popular with at that time period was children who grew up in the 80s,
Yeah.
who had their youthful innocence destroyed by these films and were primed for a Tom Green to come into their lives in adolescence and blow their little minds. Yeah.
A product of the 80s, Mr. Green. Yes. Thank you for all you have done. You are a legend. So
truly,
here we go. I went into the library. Now, of course, I could not, for whatever reason, find the Neverending Story 1. It's in there somewhere, but I was able to find the Neverending Story 2, though, which is equally dark and troublesome. And this most certainly has a G rating. Now, for those of you who don't know, a G rating means it's for everyone, I believe.
Yeah, general audience.
General audience.
Anyone can. Yeah. An 8-year-old could walk up to the box office and buy a ticket, and they'd be like, "Go on in."
So let's see. The Neverending Story 2 came out in 1990. Now, this movie deals with some other dark topics, but is probably nowhere near as dark as the first one was. Or maybe equally it is. I'd have to go back. I haven't watched this one in a while. But point being, Neverending Story trilogy, G rating, deals with death and the nothingness and sadness and the apocalypse and all sorts of things. So there's our first example.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bastion, for giving her a new name.
I violated our rule and I did look up the Neverending Story and it was rated PG.
It was?
Yeah, that's the original. According to IMDb, it says PG. And oh yes, I am looking at the official one-sheet movie poster for the film, and parental guidance suggested.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
This is 1984, so this is probably prior to the invention of the PG-13 rating.
Yeah.
So the PG rating was pretty broad for a while there because it was anything that, like, maybe not everyone should see this, but it's not R.
I am surprised by that, though. I'm surprised that the original has a PG and the second has a G.
Yeah.
So, what does this have? Let's see.
Is that Return to Oz?
It certainly is.
That is a just bizarre movie.
So, for those of you who don't know, there is a sequel to The Wizard of Oz.
Return to Oz, starring young Fairuza Balk, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct. Okay, so this Anchor Bay production does not have a rating on it. That's amazing.
Yeah, right. That is a profoundly, like, just unsettling film.
So, premise of this film: poor Dorothy has been sent to the psych ward. She is receiving electroshock therapy. She has been deemed insane for traveling to Oz the first time. The best part is the electroshock therapy sends her back to Oz. Hence, the Return to Oz. This fucking
what a premise.
This fucking movie is incredible. It's basically a horror movie built off the premise of The Wizard of Oz. Dorian, I hate to ask you to do this, but can you please look up the rating of this movie?
Yeah, I will definitely do that. Also, fun fact about that, if you, I believe
I got it. It's PG.
Oh, okay.
I found it finally.
This is also directed by Frank Oz, if I remember correctly.
Nope. Walter Murch.
Oh, Walter Murch. That's right. He directed this. Walter Murch is the editor of Apocalypse Now.
There we go. Perfect.
I
do believe that Frank
editor
did have something to do with this, though, but because I do remember hearing that at some point.
Yeah, I thought but no, Walter Murch, that's right, because Walter Murch is like this really famous, legendary Hollywood editor. He wrote a book called In the Blink of an Eye that's like any film school you go to, that's going to be the first thing they tell you to read, you know, as far as like editing and the theory and practice behind it. Because he's a really interesting philosophical guy. Also, potentially invented surround sound audio. It was something they were experimenting with Apocalypse Now. They were developing this whole multi-track, sonic experience, because he was apparently a big pioneer in the sound realm as well for film. There was a lot of crazy ideas he had with editorial stuff where he wanted this experiential component with the way the sound moved with the image. So he got really deep into that stuff too, and became quite a force in that side of the industry as well.
Very cool. He probably worked with Dolby then, I assume.
Yeah,
Thomas, right?
Yeah.
So very quickly, and we're not gonna drone on about each of these movies, but the premise of this movie, beyond the fact that Dorothy has been sent to an insane asylum, is that the city of Oz has completely gone to shit. And it is up to Dorothy and her new friends, basically reimaginings of the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and the Cowardly Lion. She has a talking chicken, but yeah, so like the yellow brick road has been destroyed. Oz is under the rule of the Gnome King, and he's basically, turned this once fruitful city into the slums of Fantasy World. I don't know. I wonder if they've ever talked about what like universe Oz exists in. Like, is there a state in which the city of Oz subsides? I don't know.
I would guess, the Wicked series seems to have a lot of that pretty covered.
Oh, do they? I've never watched. I
haven't either, but apparently it's like a couple of my friends were talking about it. I was like, I did not know it was this involved.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I know that there's a lot more information in the books because there's multiple books, is there not?
Yes. Yeah. I wonder if this movie is considered canon within that world.
I doubt
it. Probably not. It would be kind of cool if they rolled that in though. Like if they were able to make that work.
Yeah. But like, imagine, so I believe this came out in 85-ish, right? I might be off on that, but
somewhere in there.
Yeah, something like that. Anywho, right. So imagine, like, I think that this was a thing when I was a kid, but right, didn't they always used to do the Wizard of Oz marathon like right before Christmas or some shit?
Yeah, that's right. It was definitely a staple,
Yeah, like on TBS, they'd do like 24 hours of Oz, right? So imagine you're a kid growing up, and the magical world of Oz is this thing that you look forward to every year, right around Christmas, which is the most magical time of year. And then out of nowhere, there's a sequel, and you turn the sequel on. And you find out that Dorothy has been committed and they are running electroshock therapy on her because she has lost her goddamn mind. Talk about fucking up your childhood. This movie will do it very quickly. Yeah.
Before you know it, you're embroiled in a metaphor for urban decay and gentrification. It's a lot for a child to process.
It certainly is. All right. Next on the list. All right. This one isn't so great of an example of destroying youthful innocence, but there is a darkness to these. Can you see this, Dorian?
Yeah. The Ewok Adventure.
Do you remember the Ewok Adventures?
Briefly, or very vaguely, I should say. I saw them when I was younger, but it's been so long that I don't recall really anything about them.
Okay. So obviously Star Wars was never intended, I don't believe anyway, for young children, right? Star Wars was made for teenagers and above. These wonderful movies starring, well, one of them stars Wilford Brimley. I think it's the second one, maybe. There's two movies. There's the Battle for Endor, and then there's the Ewok Adventure. So there's here's the thing. The Ewoks were like the cute, fun little critters in the third movie, right? They were made for children, similarly to how like Jar Jar Binks was in the prequels. And there was a thing where it's like, okay, we need to make something that the kids want to enjoy, so that way they can like age into this whole thing or whatever.
Yeah.
So the Ewok Adventures were like these little like made for TV movies, I believe. And the premise is that a family shipwrecks on the planet of Endor, and I do believe, maybe not in the first one, but in the second one, the parents die, and the kids are basically taken in by the Ewoks, and then the Ewoks get attacked by, marauders or whatever, and then they have to have help, from Wilford Brimley to protect their village and so on and so forth. So another example of parental death made for children.
Jesus. These are all, it's interesting just to, that element keeps coming up. It's almost like, these people were like preparing children for some inevitable, like, hey, you might be on your own at one point, but I guess these are, I don't know, not to bring it into too broad of a context, but like these are wartime generations, like the boomer generation and the so-called greatest generation. And then like, Vietnam era, like these were all generations that kind of, I guess maybe had their lives upended in this way. And we're like, hey, guess what? It's up to you to like figure it out now.
All right.
Made its way into our entertainment.
Yeah. I mean, well, so there's a term used for our generation and the generation. I mean, I like teeter, I believe, let's see, what, you're a year or two older than me? I'm going to be 41 next week.
Yeah, I'll be 43 in next month.
Right. So we're in that weird sort of like gray area between like true Gen X and millennials, right?
Yep.
We're old enough to remember what life was like without the internet, but we're young enough to be able to adopt it and all those kind of things. True Gen Xers, were born in the late 70s, in the 70s sometime, right? So like, we used to, like, there was a term used for, people like myself who just kind of ran wild. We were latchkey kids, we had no curfew. We had no parental guidance, so to speak. We just kind of existed and we figured it out and, just ran wild throughout the town and what. So like these movies, in my mind, prepared me to be able to thrive as a latchkey kid. It was like, all right, I know that there's fucked up shit out there and I'm prepared for it. Let's go.
Right. Yeah.
There are no surprises when you are brought up on movies like this,
Right. You got to taught to be on alert. Like you can't just like, you can't trust everything at face value,
My parents might die any minute now. Thank you, George Lucas and friends, for reminding me that, so yeah, I mean, this is great stuff. I love it. I think there's also something to behold when you have a dark sense of humor, when you can accept and appreciate the bad things that inevitably come with life, but you can put a smile on it, and there is always humor in the hardships of life. Right. You just sometimes you gotta try very, very hard to find it.
So if you can put that angle to it and kind of enjoy the luxury of being able to laugh about it and kind of what that says about where you're at currently, it's like, because we all know it's it's going to come back around and it's not going to be funny anymore. But if there's a time where it can be, you should take pleasure in that if you can.
Well, it's like it's like anything in life, right? The more accustomed you are to a thing, the easier it becomes, right? So like if you swing a golf club 1,000 times and then you swing a golf club another 1,000 times, it's going to become easier and you're going to become better at it, right? So if you watch a bunch of movies that knock you over the head with dark themes, you are going to be better at dealing with said dark themes.
Yep.
I guess, right? That's one way to get it, I suppose. I don't know.
That's how, I've felt about, generally like horror films in general for a very long time. And they're like, their continued popularity, like through every kind of trend that ever occurs in the film world. And, horror still has a place and an audience. It's just, to me, the idea of like, like any movie in my mind is a safe space because it's a fucking movie. You know, it's fake. It's not real. It's not happening. So like if you can confront things that frighten you in a place that is like intrinsically safe, the movie's never going to reach out of the screen and actually harm you. You know, I've felt the same way, that it is in a way like sort of prepares you. Sure, like again, it's a movie. It's not going to make you like it's not going to prepare you in the way that like real experience is in any way. But, you know, if you can have some small gains in that regard through confronting these things through film where you're sort of on a safe footing and can process those emotions and feelings, you know, like that's a really positive thing.
Yeah.
And that's what these movies were doing. It's just, you know, for a very young audience that didn't maybe realize this is what they were engaging with. But, you know, I think, as you pointed out at the beginning, I think there's, you know, there are definitely some benefits to be said, you know, spoken for this.
So this right here, this sums up the entire point of this episode. There is something on this box that basically sums up the entire notion of what we're talking about right now. Let me read this to you. Certain portions of this picture may be unsuitable for younger children. Now, think about that for a second. The fact that they would say certain portions, how the fuck are you supposed to know which portions? Wouldn't you just say this movie is not suitable for younger children?
Yep, you'd think so. This was the like hand over the eyes generation.
Yeah, that's so.
Like,
This is what I'm talking about, right? Like, you can make these movies, or you used to be able to make these movies, and you are blatantly selling them to a young audience. But be on the lookout, because certain portions may not be suitable for that young audience. Now, we're going to keep the George Lucas train rolling with one of my all-time favorites, Mr. Howard the Duck.
Yeah.
You want to talk about a movie not suitable for children?
No, not even
not 1 minute of this movie is suitable for young children.
It is unsuitable.
But I tell you what, I watched this movie when I was 5 years old, and I fucking fell in love with it. And I mean, Leah Thompson, first off, is the greatest. And the fact that she falls in love with an alien duck is just the greatest.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember some of the, there's like, I mean, he's a despicable drunk, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Isn't he at like a duck strip club to open the movie?
I think he might be. There is duck nudity.
Yeah,
in the movie.
Right?
Which
yeah. We're talking about
it's not that. Leaves. Yeah, it's not that scene though. But he might be at a strip club at the beginning. Yeah, when he's still in like the duck universe.
Yeah, exactly. So Howard the Duck, one of the first great comic book movies for all you fucking dorks out there. The
first Marvel movie. If I'm not mistaken, yeah.
Is this technically the first Marvel movie?
I believe it might be.
I'm gonna dispute you on that, because wasn't there a Spider-Man movie in the 70s? Aha!
Was there a movie? I'm pretty sure there was a TV show.
There was a TV show, and then I think they made a movie spin-off of that. But
yeah,
let's put it this way: one of the first Marvel movies.
Yeah.
Why they chose Howard the Duck is beyond me, but
no idea.
I mean, it's an incredible comic book. He is a crotchety old detective who likes to smoke cigars and drink whiskey and say terrible things to people.
Sounds
like a kid's movie to me.
Yep. Who, gets transported back to the human world, the world that we live in, and has to find his way back to the duck universe while I don't know, learning something about humanity along the way.
Yeah. So,
I actually watched that movie like 2 years ago.
It's so good.
The first time I'd seen it in a very, very long time. Yeah, no, it was hilarious. Just it's such a good. Same thing I was saying earlier about how, like, you know, I watched it without blinking an eye. We just watched this movie in the 80s. We're like, yep, that's what a movie is. And then watching it now, you're just like, how did anyone think this was like a good idea to show this to kids?
Yep. But it was.
But yeah, it was still very entertaining. And there's a bunch of really awesome stop motion work at the end when this like alien creature shows up that was done by Phil Tippett, who who's like a legend within that realm. He did, I think, a lot of the stuff for Jurassic Park, and recently put out a movie called Mad God that is wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. So there's also like a really legit, awesome stop motion animation sequence at the end of this movie that's like super impressive.
I'm trying to. Well, there's the part with the. Oh, is it when the doctor starts like shooting lightning and shit, right? And
yeah.
Then,
they like open the interdimensional portal, and this like giant creature comes out with like all these, legs and tentacle mouth and stuff. And it just wreaks havoc all over this lab for a few minutes. It's really fun. Yeah, great sequence.
All right. This is the fucking best. I'm having fun today.
Yeah.
All right.
Wanted to. We've been so serious the past few.
I know, right? So you get to see the other side of all this now,
Mm-hmm.
So the last movie that I pulled, now we could do this and we could keep doing this, but I just pulled a handful of movies out of my library. Now this last movie is perhaps the most special of them all.
Mm.
And I say this because it exists in a world that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's a classic horror movie made for children. It does have a PG-13 rating.
Mm.
So this might have been one of the first PG-13 movies, which, if I'm not mistaken, means if you're 13 or older, it is okay to watch this, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. If you're under 13, you have to have a parent. Over 13, you're in.
Great. Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Now, I mean, obviously it exists, right? It was like the first great, like, the clown's gonna kill you movie. But I'm pretty sure that was rated R. And that was directly made for adults. This movie, if I am not mistaken, was shown to me when I was 7 years old. And now, granted, it does have the word killer clown in it, but it was always assumed that it was like a cute horror movie, which it is.
Yeah.
But it's still a horror movie at the end of the day. You are still getting shot with the cotton candy ray gun. They are sucking your blood with crazy straws. And there is popcorn that will eat you, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
Clowns are a weird thing for some people. I've always found them to be highly entertaining. And I think that this movie might have something to do with that.
Yeah.
Because once you're confronted with a killer clown, clowns aren't that big of a deal anymore. But in the 80s, this movie was okay for kids to watch. Do you think anyone in their right fucking mind would show this to an 8-year-old today?
I doubt it. Yeah. I mean, like the cool parents for sure, but no, it's a wild movie. Yeah. And on top of it too, it's like, it's basically like it even starts more as like a teen sex comedy.
Yeah.
Because it's like these two guys get this ice cream truck to try to get laid. Like that's the start of the movie, and then they just happen upon it accidentally becomes a horror movie.
Yeah. They find their spaceship is a circus tent.
Yes, that's right.
They find it in one of the couples finds it in the woods when they're hooking up, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
they like run. They're like, why is this circus in the woods? What is going on here? Let's go investigate.
Yep. Let's check it out. Which is how, I mean, that's also just how like every great 80s movie starts, is like idiots see something in the distance and decide to investigate.
But like this is the kind of stuff right here that like you want to hear a quote? The LA Times, fiendishly clever. The clowns are a wonder to behold. They certainly were. I will say this much: the costume and makeup people for this movie should have won the fucking Oscar that year.
Yeah.
Because they are so outrageously amazing looking.
Yeah. The directors, the Chiodo brothers, they were makeup effects guys. And I believe this was their first directorial effort and maybe their only. But I know they did all the Krites for the Critters movies.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And have done a whole bunch of other productions. It's escaping me now, but they're kind of like a known quantity within the like makeup practical effects world. And I think that's how they got, afforded the opportunity to make this movie, was because like they pulled in a lot of favors and were able to do a lot of stuff on their own. So they were able to kind of like semi-independently get this made, or do more than they would have been able to with the budget they were given, because they were just so hands-on DIY about everything.
We have
which shows in every frame. It's like it's like this outrageous, crazy movie. But that's the thing too, is like all these movies we're talking about, they're all like lovingly crafted, Well, that's the people who made all these things, like obviously really, really gave a shit about them and like really believed in these projects. It wasn't this like, it doesn't have that dirty feel of like a cash grab,
Totally.
It feels like this was genuinely someone's vision and like something that they, probably almost killed themselves to get made.
Charles and Stephen Chiodo, written and directed by.
That's right. Yeah.
And produced by. Oh, we can't forget about Edward Chiodo. So there's 3 of them.
Those 3 brothers. Gotcha.
3 brothers.
Edward
Chiodo. Or maybe it's their dad. I don't know. Like, hey Dad, can I get $500,000 so I can make this wacky movie about fucking
sure, son. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the 80s were a special time for so many reasons. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. These are like the movies that from my childhood at a very early age was, I mean, I'm about to turn 41 years old, and for literally over 30 years, these were the first movies that I remember watching. And to this day, I have such fond, incredible memories of all of them. And I guess I can thank my parents for not being so discerning about the things that were put on our television.
It's funny. It's because I remember that like all the, this was so common that like kids were being shown these movies, like at least in the area I grew up, like, when I go to school and talk to them, some of the cultier stuff like Killer Clowns, maybe not so much, but everything else, Never Ending Story, all this, it was so just like common and like part of the cultural vernacular at the time. Like it was kind of weird if you hadn't seen this stuff.
Totally.
And I do remember like I had a couple of friends whose parents like were very vigilant about like, they didn't have cable, like, you can't watch these movies or these shows or anything like that and all that. And like, it was, the common perception was that they were weird,
Yeah.
That's strange, behavior to exercise that, much attention to the media being consumed by your children. It was like this free for all of just like, just let them have it, and obviously now it's quite the opposite, where it's, probably advisable to be, more discerning about the media consumed by your youth.
But I think there's a certain aspect to it where when you broach serious topics in a not so serious way, there is a certain amount of grace that you kind of afford yourself and say, hey, let's not pretend like death and sadness and all these things don't exist, but let's create an experience where it's okay to say, yes, these things do exist, but so do the other things. So does the hope, and so does the adventure, and so does the, fantastical. And, I always go back to the Never Ending Story when I really like boil all of this down, right? Because it really is the one movie that does it better than any other movie in the history of time. That is so dark and so light all at the same time.
Mm.
And the way that it weaves in and out of good and bad and dark and scary and hopeful and all of those things. It just there's just never ever been anything quite like it. And it's probably why, it's this very special movie to people 40 years later. I mean, like I said, I got this amazing little handmade Falcor thing that like sits on top of one of my sound panels that just kind of looks over the entire studio. He's like my little like guardian, and like I said, there is a symbolic nature to my dog as well. So it kind of embodies both. But like, I got Silas because I loved Falcor.
That's awesome. And it's probably worth mentioning too, because we've obviously gone on about the really heady subjects that are engaged in this film. It does end in a way that it is like you get through it,
Yeah.
Like it's not like it's just everything sucks and then you die. It's like, you're going to go through these things, but you're going to come out the other end stronger.
Exactly.
And that's what a lot of these movies, kind of come to in the end is like, yeah, you're going to get beat down and beat down and beat down. And like, you just have to keep pushing forward. And like that at the end of the day is obviously like a really, really positive thing.
Yeah.
And, to kind of go back to what you're saying about just like being able to actually confront these things, there's like a whole idea, it pertains to everything, but with film being a visual medium that's faced a lot of like controversy over the years for being obscene or smut or whatever, that censorship is what makes something vulgar. Like if you say if you tell people it's forbidden, then it becomes this like weird thing that has this quality of like you can't talk about it. It becomes taboo when you do, but it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy, and there's that applies of course to like literal censorship, but even just this idea of like, oh, we don't talk about death, to like the kids or stuff. It's like, well, guess what kids are going to be really interested in hearing about now is death. Yeah. And they're going to find it from like weird places, like, the schoolyard where, just like, the classic, like learning about sex, that like kids have all these weird ideas about it because it's this taboo to like talk about it in your youth. Whereas there's like lots of other cultures where that's not a taboo thing. And it's, guess what? It's fine. They're no more or less perverted than we are, as a result of being open about these things. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. It speaks to that. There's a great example actually of there's this Japanese film called In the Realm of the Senses that is about a woman named Sada Abe, who's sort of like a folk hero in Japan, who don't need to get into her whole story, but the movie that was made about her life and this long sort of like love story affair that she had with somebody that was outside of like her social hierarchy. The movie, before it depicts the way that things go horribly awry with this relationship, the director wanted to bring you into, what a true kind of like blossoming love they had and like kind of what a beautiful thing it was, even if it was forbidden, little Romeo and Juliet thing there. But so, in the course of making the film, he decided to include like graphic sexual scenes between these two characters, and not in a way that like invited you in like pornography does, where it's like, hey, you're like a participant here, but in a way that's like, we're sort of like seeing something that's natural and beautiful happening between two people that are really into each other. And the movie, of course, when it got put in front of like Japanese studios and stuff, it got super censored and everything. And it wasn't even released for a long time. And then they released it in a form where it was censored. And actually everybody who saw the movie when it was released with like blurred out genitalia and all that stuff was like, it is so much more vulgar like that than because like adding the censorship is what makes it seem like something wrong is happening here. If you just like watch the movie as it is, it's just kind of like, I mean, this isn't like energizing in a sexual way whatsoever. It feels like it's just part of the story, And but yeah, when you put that taboo on top of it, it completely changed the context. And like that's actually what made it seem wrong and dirty was the censorship. So yeah,
that's incredible insight, because you don't really ever think about it in those terms. the idea that like the no makes it more than it should be.
So, right, exactly. It like turns the proverbial molehill into a mountain type of thing. That's like you're making it a way bigger deal than it is.
So for all you Debbie Downers out there, stop trying to fucking tell people what they can and can't do, and maybe everyone will chill the fuck out a little bit.
Yeah. Maybe mind your damn business.
Well, I mean, I think that this has been the most fun episode we've done yet.
Yeah. I have one last question for you, actually.
Yeah, of course.
I'm just curious. So, because you now have a son.
Yeah. Here we go.
I'm just curious. Like, yeah, are you like, what's your thought? You know, we've had this conversation, but what are your thoughts on like the reality of you thinking about like me turning this movie on for him?
Well, so here's the funny part about that. This is actually very funny. My kid is a fucking scaredy cat. He is afraid of everything right now. He goes, that scares me. And he says it to everything. So like, I tried to put on the goddamn Care Bears movie for him the other day, and Darkheart freaked him out.
Oh, damn.
So obviously he's only 3 years old, so we still got some time. We'll work through this. But he, I think, like, I mean, I'm gonna let him steer the ship. That's the thing, right?
Yeah.
I think my entire mindset as a parent is, if you think you're ready for this, let's fucking go. If you're not, I'm not going to push it on you. That's for sure. You know, and if you think you're ready, but you're not, I will be very, very, very aware and will help bail you out well before it gets to be too late. So, you know, like I mean, it was the biggest shock in the world to me. We put the Care Bears movie on and he goes, oh, that's scary. And like, was legitimately like kind of freaked out by it. And I was like, all right, we're turning this off now.
Yeah.
You know, so I think it's the biggest thing I can say as a parent in 2020, whatever year it is, 5 now, is it's not so much about like creating guardrails, or it's not so much about like, you know, oh, you're not ready for this or you're not ready for that. It's just being hyper aware and observant of what your kid is actually expressing. And I think that's like, that's it, right?
Yeah.
Like when you watch them, you don't like, you're not looking for the reaction. You're not looking for anything. You're just saying, he's good, he's not good. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you cut it off. Yeah. And so that's been my approach. You know, I learned a very, very hard lesson, and maybe this is why he's a little scaredy cat now. So when he was like, you want to talk about killing youthful innocence? Jesus Christ. All right. We're going to end on this little story. So because I'm going to have to go cry in my bathroom for 20 minutes after I tell this story.
Uh-huh.
Not really, but it's pretty bad. So when he was like, I don't know, 6 months old, 8 months old, I don't know how old he was. I don't remember, but he was young, right? Maybe he was a year old. I don't know. We had a power outage, and the cable, so there was a storm. The power went out for a little bit, but the cable was really out. So we had no internet, no TV or anything. And so I went to a Red Box, which I hadn't done in years, and there was nothing in this Red Box at the grocery store. And I could have just as well just like hooked up a VCR to like the upstairs TV, but like at the time, I think a lot of it was like packed away maybe or something. And it just wasn't like, I was like, I'll just go rent some DVDs. I'll go find some kids movies, right? So there's nothing in this Red Box. The only kids movie that they had was Toy Story 4 or whatever, which I didn't even know there was a 4 at that point. And then Cocaine Bear had just come out. Right. And I was like, oh, well, you know, like it's a movie about a bear. Maybe he'll find this amusing. you know, not realizing what the fuck Cocaine Bear actually was. And so we put this movie on, and the bear starts. I thought it was a comedy. I didn't realize that it was like a gory, like slasher film. And within like 5 minutes of the movie, the bear starts tearing some person to shreds, and my kid freaks the fuck out. And I was like, oh no, what have I done? So we turn it off, right? But like, it definitely scarred him a little bit. It freaked him out. Like, he had never had nightmares to that point, and he did not sleep that entire night. And I was like,
man,
oh no, what have I done? And so I think that's what's made him hypersensitive to like bad things or monsters or whatever. Like, he freaked out by dinosaurs. Like, so he watches this thing called Brain Candy that's like, it teaches him how to count, and it teaches him, you know, colors and all this stuff, right? And a lot of times it uses these like monster trucks to like help drive the whatever the lesson is for that day. And there's one episode that has monster trucks and dinosaurs. And he goes, I want to watch monster trucks, but no dinosaurs. Roar! And like, it's like the cutest thing in the world. Like, he's freaked out by like monsters and stuff. So, you know, this may be residuals of Cocaine Bear, or he just may be hyper empathetic, and which is a good thing ultimately. Either way. Yeah, I just have to be in tune and be paying attention to where he's at with things. So like, I'm never gonna like force him to watch something that he's not ready for, and inversely, I'm never gonna like, you know, think it's funny if he's like freaked out by something or anything. Right. Like that. So like, you know, if he comes to me one day and he's like, hey dad, I want to know more about this, and like, all right, let's go. Let's see if you're ready. And that's the Greg Ellis playbook when it comes to parenting. It's just let them guide you. Yeah.
So what you're saying is have a relationship with your child and pay attention to who they're becoming as a person and act accordingly.
Exactly. Yeah.
And be prepared. I should mention too, just in defense of my parents, that, you know, as I was watching all of this crazy shit, I do remember, you know, them having several kind of check-in context providing, you know, moments of just sort of like, so like, just to be clear, like, you know, this is all fake, right?
Yeah.
Like, these are just movies, you know, things like that. Like, you know, there were definitely what you're saying about the way that you sort of approach Hudson. Like, my parents knew, you know, I could handle these things. So when my dad took me to Pulp Fiction when I was 13, you know, he was like, you're going to understand why this is the way it is, you know? So
no, I think my dad found it humorous when he freaked me out, and which in turn, you know, turned me into the animal that I am today, which you know, I'm thankful for ultimately, but you know, there probably could have been some better ways to go about things back then.
An exposure therapy.
Yeah. So today's insight into why people like me and Dorian are lunatics. Thank you, 80s movies, for cracking the egg in the most fantastic way possible.
Nicely put. Yeah. And I still I think about these movies fondly every time I still go searching for, you know, I'm still like chasing that high that I got, you know, as a kid watching these types of movies, like looking for like the weirdest kind of most out there you know, 70s, 80s, 90s films when it was like kind of the Wild West.
Yeah.
And you know, there wasn't as much of an eye, you know, overseeing eye as far as like content, you know, or age group, kind of how those two things, you know, intersected. And you know, you just ended up with these incredibly weird, bizarre, probably ill-advised and like incredibly narrow cast movies that I love. And, you know, I'm just, it ingrained into me in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Sweet. Yeah. Well, that's going to do it for this week. Dorian, have fun. Well, when this episode airs, Dorian will already be in Japan.
That's right.
So he will be seeking out inappropriate movies for us to watch with, I actually have, dude, we're going to leave this in the episode. So if you come across any shops that have VHS.
Oh yeah.
I do collect Japanese VHS. I have the OG Star Wars trilogy on VHS, and I've got a bunch of Godzilla, like actual Japanese Godzilla tapes and a bunch of other
Cool.
random shit. So yes. So everyone wish Dorian well in his adventures in Japan.
Thank you.
And till next time. Thank you,
Yeah.
guys.